This week, the House passed legislation that would bar the government from buying telecommunications equipment from companies like Huawei, who are deemed to be national security threats. Bipartisan Secure and Trusted Communications Network Act unanimously cleared the House. It's expected to go to a vote in the Senate this week. So here to weigh in on this legislation and more is Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Congressman, you've been really leading the way. I had a great and interesting discussion with you about on my podcast about China. I wanted to bring it to our viewers here. Tell us a little bit about the way that you're looking at the Chinese tech situation in particular with your legislation on Huawei.
Well, at stake here, I think, is the future of the internet, which is foundational to the future of our economy, if not the free world. And the more we learn about Huawei and ZTE, the more it confirms what I've long believed, which is that they are appendages of the Chinese Communist Party. We've had everything from the finite states report to extensive reporting by the Wall Street Journal to suggest that if we allow Huawei and ZTE to lay the foundation for the future of the internet, we will have no confidence that any of our communication is secure, and we will give the Chinese Communist Party a geopolitical advantage. And as we know, the CCP does not share our vision for what they want the world to look like in the future.
Mm-hmm. So, Congressman, lay out the steps here legislatively and maybe from the executive branch on how an implementation to keep these companies out of the U.S. market would go about.
I think there's really two buckets you can put everything in. One is defensive, and that is continuing what we've tried to do legislatively and through executive order, which is keep Huawei on the entities list so that U.S. companies can provide Huawei a lifeline. Obviously, and most basically, denying Huawei and ZTE the ability to work with the U.S. government in general and defense and the intelligence community in particular. But really, the sort of final part of that defensive game is convincing our closest allies. The Brits stand out. Our European allies, the Germans in particular, are going through very difficult discussions right now whether to allow Huawei and ZTE to compete for the future of 5G. We really need to be in lockstep with them. We need to convince them that this represents an unacceptable threat to the future of the internet, and we haven't done so far. The second part is more difficult. It's an offensive game. It's to say, can we band together with like-minded countries and give free world companies, Nokia, Ericsson, the opportunity to compete on a level playing field with Huawei and ZTE, who use predatory pricing to go to continents like Africa and say, we will give you cheap internet. Don't worry about the counterintelligence concerns.
So, Congressman, Huawei, the way that they and their lobbyists counter this is that they have the cheapest products. And so, if they go to somebody like maybe your constituents, you're from Wisconsin, they say, hey, we could deliver you telecom service cheaper than a U.S. company, and you're out there advocating for their removal from the market. How do you tell consumers, or how do you tell American consumers about the dangers of the penetration of this company into our network?
Well, listen, it is true they have the cheapest product, but they have the cheapest product because they benefit from generous state subsidies from the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. If you are solely worried about price and you're not worried about someone spying on all of your communications, then it's going to be very hard for me to make an argument to you. But again, I do think we need to meet the free world halfway here and develop ways in which we can work with like-minded countries. For example, have a digital development fund, or take a hard look at our anti-cartel laws and our anti-monopoly laws to ensure that we can have competitive bid with Huawei, because we can compete on quality, we can certainly compete on freedom of communication, but if we're competing solely on price, that may be a losing game. But at the end of the day, I think we have to tie all this back to the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, what they're trying to accomplish, and why that's fundamentally at odds with what the free world is trying to accomplish.
Right. I think that's an important point. In that light of that news, the president announced this new phase 1 deal with China. Are you encouraged by these developments? And broadly, how does it say about the future of the U.S.-Chinese relationship when you're talking about here with Huawei? All private companies in China are effectively state-controlled instruments of their power. So, how should we look at doing business with China? What do you think?
Well, as it pertains to the deal, as I read it, I think it's effectively a deal not to escalate further and punt on key issues like IP theft, forced technology transfer, and the things that were really the foundation of the 301 tariff actions in the first place. And so I very much hope we do not cave on those bigger issues going forward. And I do think, to relate it to the second part of your question, we are going to have to figure out how we decouple responsively key parts of our economy from that of the Chinese economy. In other words, I have no problem with Wisconsin farmers selling soybeans to China, But I do have a problem with Chinese technology infiltrating every aspect of our defense technological industrial base. And so we're going to have to ensure transparency in our capital markets. We're going to have to ensure the integrity of our supply chain. And ultimately, we're going to have to start making a lot of key technology domestically in America that we simply don't make anymore.
While we're talking, of course, the chamber that you're coming from is actually embroiled in much less serious matters, I guess, on the matter of impeachment. What's your reaction to that vote that's impending soon? And how do you think that the chamber will go? Will we see some House moderate Democrats vote with the Republicans here?
I think there will be a handful of Democrats that vote against Democratic leadership, so the bipartisan vote will be against impeachment. That's stunning, given how much time and attention this has taken up. If you analyze both articles of impeachment, the second one, obstruction of Congress, is exceptionally weak. It's not a thing. It doesn't involve an actual crime like obstruction of justice or contempt of Congress, as was the case with Nixon or Clinton, for example. The first article, abuse of power, is also vague and nebulous, and I worry this opens up a Pandora's box where we're going to be mired in a state of perpetual impeachment. We're going to have people on both sides trying to delegitimize every election, and that is just a sad state for our country to be in. So this is going nowhere, and I hope cooler heads will prevail in the future.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep. We'll have more Rising for you right after this.